host, Agnes Wolf. Today I have Rebecca Bratspies. She is a professor of environmental law and an author of Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York's Place Names. And actually, I hear that you have published more than just that, although you said this was kind of the one more for the general audience. Do you mind sharing about first what else you've written? Well, first, I want to hear, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure, glad to. Hi, everybody. I am Rebecca Bratspies. I'm a law professor here in New York City. I've lived in New York City for a very long time, and I live with my husband, our child, and our two cats in Queens, which is one of the boroughs of New York. It's across the East River from Manhattan. And I teach and write about environmental justice, about New York City, and about environmental policy more broadly.
Oh, awesome. One of the things I found interesting is that I read in your bio, it says that you've written 4 other books, 3 environmental justice comic books. And I know you worked with an illustrator on that. Do you mind sharing a little bit about those?
I am delighted to. And just so you know, first of all, just so you know, the other books the titles are things like Transboundary Harm in International Law. So they're not, they're for a very specialized audience. The comic books, on the other hand, are for everybody. They're a project that I do with an incredibly talented artist named Charlie LaGreca Velasco. And he and I have been working together for about a decade, making graphic novels and shorter comics that are used as teaching tools in schools here in New York City and in schools across the country, both at the high school level and at the university and law school level. They are freely available on my website and can be downloaded for any non-commercial, educational, or nonprofit use.
Awesome. So do you mind just sharing what your website is, and I'll make sure I put that into the show notes.
Sure. It is my name, RebeccaBratspies.com.
So RebeccaBratspies. All right. So, but what we're here today is to actually talk about the book Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York's Place Names. So before we get in, well, what was your inspiration for this book?
To be honest, my inspiration was traffic. I live in New York City and my parents live in Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up. And in order to go visit them, first of all, there is no public transportation, which drives me crazy. So we have to drive to get there. And in order to get there, we have to take a road called the Major Deegan Expressway. That's the road that goes by Yankee Stadium, and it is the road you take to get to the George Washington Bridge. So everybody takes the Major Deegan, who's driving. And they want to leave New York. Nobody has a clue who the guy was. We all know who George Washington was, but who was Major Deegan? Nobody knows, but everybody curses him because we're all stuck in traffic on the Major Deegan. So I used to complain a lot, and my complaints would be in the nature of, I hate this guy. Who was he? And my husband finally just said, well, why don't you just find out who he was? So I did. And it turned out he was a lot less impressive than you might expect, given that this major road that goes past Yankee Stadium to the George Washington Bridge bears his name. So that sort of got me started on asking, who are all these people that we name things after? And eventually that became this book.
That's awesome. So I have read the book, or I read parts of the book, because it's a really beautifully looking book. It would be a really great coffee table book for people, and I imagine it should be sold at gift shops around New York City and in the museums around there, just because it is such a delightful little book. But I know that when we talked earlier, you had talked about how you had originally we're going to name it after this. What is it?
Major Deegan.
Yeah, Major
Yes.
Deegan. And but you ended up having to change it. Do you mind sharing that story?
No, not at all. So I wrote this book, and the working title, and in fact, all of my files are still called Major Deegan, because my working title for the book was, who was that Major Deegan anyway? And I always imagine somebody saying it in a very New York accent, like, who was that Major Deegan anyway? My publisher, though, took one look and they were like, we like this book, we hate the title. And they pointed out to me that if the title was Who Was Major Deegan, people are going to assume that it's a book, it's a biography of Major Deegan, as opposed to what it is, which is a sort of series of chapters about the various people that we name infrastructure for across New York City. So they changed it, and we went back and forth. I don't remember what they proposed, but I didn't like it. And then eventually we settled on something that I liked and they liked, though I did propose that it be naming Gotham the heroes, rogues, and villains behind New York place names. And they're like, no, 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 villains go first.
Yeah. What's interesting is when you had first said it to my ear, I really liked heroes, rogues, and villains. But then I realized when you had sent, because like when I was originally planning this podcast, I thought I would just mainly do fiction writers. But when you mentioned that the title, I was like, okay, I'm interested in this nonfiction book. A lot of it was the title. And then I got to thinking, I think because I saw that villains first. I think if I had said heroes, I may not have connected as quick, but I'm like, villains. So then I had to look, okay, let's see what this book is about. Oh, yes, I definitely want her on the show. I think this would be a really great fit. So you did a lot of research. I was looking at the citations and it's like 5, 6, 7 pages long. It's very long. And I'm like, wow, she did a lot of research. So what was your the most surprising thing you did while you were doing all that research, or you discovered, excuse me?
Oh gosh, there was so many interesting like tidbits of facts I discovered. Probably the most surprising thing is about Casimir Pulaski. So Casimir Pulaski was a Revolutionary War hero. He was a Polish nobleman who came to fight for the revolution. And there are things named for Pulaski all over the country, including the Pulaski Bridge here in New York City and the Pulaski Skyway. If you watch The Sopranos, you've seen the Pulaski Skyway because it's that long metal bridge in the opening of The Sopranos. And in fact, it was the bridge that in H.G. Wells' War of the World, when the aliens were attacking, they used the Pulaski Skyway to invade New York City. But it turns out that Pulaski was intersex, which is, I just thought was so interesting because, we have these discussions now about, all kinds of issues around sexuality and gender. And we think they're new, but they're not. They go back as long as there have been people. And so the fact that this war hero was intersex, I think is very interesting.
I did not know that. That is
Gotta
actually
read that chapter. There's a whole lot of, there's also like, there's a lot of dirt in the book. It's very gossipy. So, somebody had a scandalous divorce. It's in there, as well as their impact on New York City in whatever fashion.
That's really interesting. I'll probably have to scroll through and find that particular story because I hadn't heard that before. So what was the most challenging part of writing this book?
To be honest, the most challenging part was that I had so much material. First of all, each person was so interesting. Many of them have full biographies written about them. There must be a score of books written, for example, about LaGuardia. And Kosciuszko, another Polish Revolutionary War hero. There are books upon books written about them. So I was trying to find like the interesting New York take on them. But then I also had a lot of people that I had to cut from the book, even though I really didn't want to, because one thing, see, academic publishers, when they tell you it's going to be 150,000 words, they don't really mean it. It's very flexible, but trade publishers, when they give you a word limit, they mean it. So I had a couple fully written chapters that I had to get rid of. And I've been blogging to share some of the information that I couldn't fit into the book. So if any listeners are interested, you can check out, just search for my name and blog post New York, and you'll see a whole bunch of blog posts about people who didn't make it into the book.
I'll have to look up that link and I'll make sure I put that in the bio as well, or in the summary.
They're all collected on my website. There's a list, there's all the links to all the blog posts are there.
We'll have to check that out. Okay, so you just talked about how interesting it all was. Who would you find was the most interesting to learn about?
Well, the person that I came away with a crush on is Kosciuszko. So Kosciuszko was a Polish not nobleman. He was a commoner, though from a somewhat wealthy family, who was apparently so talented that, and I should add, before I tell you his story, that he was a Revolutionary War hero here in the United States. Anyway, he was Polish. He was really remarkably talented, so much so that the king of Poland identified Kosciuszko as one of the first people who were commoners who would be admitted to the military cadet school, which is where they trained the officers in Poland. And he excelled there so much so that the king then sent him to Paris for more military studies. And while Kosciuszko was in Paris, Pulaski, who I was just talking about, overthrew the king in what became known as the Bar Rebellion. So Kosciuszko was stuck in Paris and couldn't get back for a long time. And after some drama that, if you're interested, you can look at, he made his way to the United States, where he walked into Benjamin Franklin's print shop and said, "I'm here to fight for the revolution. And I'm a trained military expert." And Benjamin Franklin was like, sure you are. But then he quizzed him, and it turned out that he really was a trained military expert. So he sent him on to Washington. And Kosciuszko was instrumental in a number of really important military victories, including the Battle of Saratoga, which was a tide turner in the war. It was the battle that convinced the French. The victory in that battle was what convinced the French to support the Continental Army in their battle with Britain. But so that's really interesting. But what really was interesting to me about Kosciuszko was that he was an ardent anti-slavery advocate in the 1700s. And in fact, he had many long arguments with Thomas Jefferson over the immorality of enslaving people. And after helping to win the Revolutionary War here in the United States, Kosciuszko went back and led a revolution in Poland where he ended serfdom and established religious freedom, including like allowing Jews to participate in society. And it was short-lived. The Russians eventually overthrew him and took him captive, and they agreed to release him so long as he never went back to Poland. So he came to the United States, and he had to recover from his wounds because he was wounded in battle in fighting the Russians. And he came to the United States, to Philadelphia, where he was given a hero's welcome and went to the house where he recovered that is now a national landmark. If you go to Philadelphia, the Kosciuszko House is a really cool place to visit. And while he was there, he had a visit from, among others, Chief Little Turtle of the Miami Indians. And the Kosciuszko gave Chief Little Turtle, I don't know his real name, it's written down in the book, but I don't know how to pronounce it. But Kosciuszko gave Chief Little Turtle the dueling pistols that he had been awarded as a cadet in that Polish military academy, and said, "Use these on the first person who comes to subjugate you." So he was a true revolutionary. He believed passionately in freedom. In his will, he left all of his property in the United States to be used to purchase the freedom of enslaved Black men and to get them started as freed people in trades. Unfortunately, he appointed Thomas Jefferson as the administrator of his will, and it was never, ever carried out.
I don't know if I shared this with you, but I actually for a few years was a history teacher. And so that's partly when I saw this, I was like, I definitely want to read this. And I love that you share so much about the history, because I think it's so incredibly important that we know it. And I know, like, one of the things that I always told my students, and it would be on their tests and like almost every test to make sure they knew, is, I had a saying, I can't remember what like, why should we know history? And they had to answer, so that way we don't repeat it. Because history is always going to repeat itself. And so I love that I love that this is sharing all of that history. And you're also taking different inspiration from each person as you tell each story. and there's so much to take from that.
Yeah.
But also, going to your title, naming Gotham, the villains, rogues, and heroes, I do want to hear who the worst villain is, the most interesting rogue, and the most admirable hero. So let's first start with the worst villain that you found in your book. Who would you say?
So, yeah, so hands down, the worst villain is Richard Riker. Rikers Island is named after the Rikers family. And that is, for those of you who don't know, that's where New York has its main jail. And the jail is where you hold people before trial. So the people who are held there are pretrial detainees. Most of them simply can't make bail because they're poor. But Richard Riker was the he was the recorder for New York City, which was a municipal judge. And he was the recorder to New York City in the run up to the Civil War. And in that capacity, it was his job to enforce the Fugitive Slave Acts, which gave people who had enslaved Black people the right to track them down if the people escaped and drag them back to slavery. So that it was his job, Riker's job, to enforce this law, and he did it with vigor. Right? Many northern states were furious that their laws were being co-opted to participate in enslaving people, particularly people who had self-liberated and gotten themselves out of that situation. Not Rikers. He was very happy to find that people were escaped slaves and to send them back to enslavement. Now, that was bad enough. But what he actually did was way worse than that, because he, along with the chief of police and a couple other high-ranking officials, ran what came to be known as the Kidnapping Club, which was a scheme to grab random free Black New Yorkers off the street, deny them their right of habeas corpus, the right to prove that they were in fact free citizens of New York, and sell them into slavery. So he is the biggest villain. And it also, one of the things I talk about it in the book is the parallel to Rikers Island today, because in his day, Black New York hated and feared Richard Riker. They knew that he was a villain who was trying to harm them. But to white New Yorkers, he was a lovely, gentlemanly man. They wrote poems about him. He was accepted everywhere. He was a very prominent person. And in many ways, that parallels what we saw happen here in New York City with stop and frisk, which was an unconstitutional abuse of power, stopping Black men and targeting them for police intervention that sent them to Rikers Island, which bears the name of Richard Riker.
That's either coincidental or ironic, not sure. I'd not. Thank you for sharing that. I had not really heard his story before.
I said, villain.
Yes, that's definitely a villain, I would say for sure. How about who went the most rogue?
So rogue is, that's such a tricky category. I think probably Van Wyck is the biggest rogue. He was, the Van Wyck Expressway is named after him, which is a road that people take if they're going to JFK Airport. So Van Wyck was mayor of New York City just as New York City became New York City. And what that means is in 1896, I think, might be 1898, not so good with dates, Queens and Brooklyn voted to join with Manhattan and Bronx to create the city of Greater New York, which is the city that we have today, plus Staten Island. And he ran for election at that time. So in 1898, he became the first mayor of this unified city of New York. And he was a complete political tool. He was part of the Tammany machine. Tammany Hall was the political machine that controlled New York City, and it was all about corruption and buying votes and buying politicians. And he was very happy to be bought. So as mayor, Van Wyck somehow magically managed to acquire thousands of shares in what was called the American Ice Trust, which was the company that also magically somehow at the same time managed to acquire a monopoly on the right to unload ice at New York City's docks. This was the era before refrigeration, so ice was critical to keep food fresh and to keep it from spoiling and to keep medicine usable. And having gotten this monopoly from the guy that somehow magically got 5,000 shares of their stock without paying for it, American Ice immediately proceeded to double the price of ice, threatening the welfare of millions of people in New York City. So the city council decided, hey, let's open up more dock space, right? We'll build more docks, more ships can unload ice. And Van Wyck vetoed that. So he profited directly from these activities that harmed poor New Yorkers and made a lot of money off it. He left office with millions of dollars in like $1,900. So, you know, it would be worth hundreds of millions today. And in the book, I do the calculation. I don't remember it exactly. He was so corrupt that in his obituary, which is usually where you try to say nice things about a person, the New York Times described his term as mayor as the most corrupt in New York's history, and that he led an administration mired in ooze and muck. There were other scandals, but the Ice Trust one is just one example. So anyway, the road that is named after him is a horrible, terrible, always congested road. So there is some poetic justice in that.
Yeah. All right. So now we've talked about two not so shining people.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you say the most admirable hero in that you wrote about is?
Well, I already told you about Kosciuszko, so I'll tell you about somebody else, and that is Shirley Chisholm. In 2019, New York opened the Shirley Chisholm State Park. It was the first park in New York City named after the woman who was the first Black woman to serve in Congress. She was elected from Brooklyn in the 60s and was an incredible advocate for the people of New York, for women across the country, and for Black people across the country. She was instrumental in getting Title IX passed, which is the law that outlaws discrimination based on gender in education. She helped create SNAP benefits, and she ran for president in 1972. She was the first Black woman to run for president. She was the first woman to run on a Democratic ticket. She got enough delegates to be on the debate stage and to have her delegates seated and voting at the convention. And if you've ever heard the saying, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, that's Shirley Chisholm.
Wow. I actually did not know that. And I'm kind of surprised that I have not. I'll have to definitely read that particular one. So I know you shared what inspired you to write this book, but why did you decide to write, excuse me. So why did you feel that it was important to publish this book for other people? Like, what do you hope that others will get out of this book?
Well, there are a number of things I want people to get out of it. One is just I want people to know these really cool stories because I love these characters now. And I think it's a really accessible way into the history of New York, the history of the United States, and really the history of the West more generally. And, it's really important, as you said, for the reason that you indicated, it's really important that people learn history, because if we don't know our past, we are going to repeat it. And I think that people get intimidated. They feel like history is about names and dates and memorization, as opposed to understanding people in their context and realizing that their context is really complicated. One of the things we hear a lot, for example, about the practice of slavery in the United States is, well, you can't judge people back then by today's standards. But when you read about Kosciuszko, and when you read about Bryant, and when you read about Peter Cooper, you see that there were very loud, passionate voices opposed to the system of slavery while it was happening. And that's important as we're talking today about the legacies of slavery and Jim Crow that we're grappling with now. So I really wanted people to have a fun, interesting way into thinking about history. I also love New York City, so I love New York City's history. I want people to love it as much as I do. And then I also hope that people reading it who aren't in New York City, or even people who are, will look around them and say, hey, I wonder who the person is at that street or that building or that bridge or that airport is named after, and learn about where they live and use it as a window to understand their own community.
Yeah, definitely. I know that when I envisioned doing Authors Alcove, I was thinking, fiction writers, but when I saw this book and realized what it was about, I knew that, you know what, nonfiction can be just as storytelling as fiction books. And so I realized, I cannot eliminate that. And then of course, like I said, your title really hooked me too. That was a big part of it. And it is so beautifully done.
Thank you.
And so much research done into it, which is so amazing. Just out of curiosity, do you have any other books in the works right now, or anything that you're even in your mind that hasn't even hit the paper yet?
Well, right now I'm in the early stages of writing a book that is called Global Justice and the Environment. So it is a scholarly book that, again, is going to have a somewhat limited audience, but that's what I do. I'm a scholar. I don't have another book like Naming Gotham in the works right now, but I do have a comic book series that I'm working on, again, with that same artist, Charlie LaGreca Velasco, and it's a partnership with the United Nations. We're making short about 5-page comic vignettes about environmental defenders around the world to try to shine a spotlight on the risks and dangers they face as they try to defend forests and rivers and communities and green spaces.
Do you happen to have a link to those comic books, or is that something that you have to get through? I know you said it's usually for schools.
Mm-hmm. Again, there are links on my website. It's all available for free download for any non-commercial use. You can also go to the website for the United Nations Environmental Project, and you can find it's called the Environmental Defenders Series. You can find it there as well.
All right, because I know that I'm pretty active in the homeschool community, and I know that parents are always looking for that sort of thing, because comic books really interest a lot of kids when they're not really into reading or just a regular textbook.
That's why we made environmental justice comic books, right? It's to reach people who will never in a million years read any of my scholarship, which incidentally is also available on the website if you really want to delve into 50 or 60 page dense legal writing.
Well, thank you so much for all that you have shared with me, with us. And I do want to ask one more question. It's the question I ask everybody. And it is, if you could give an unpublished author advice, what would it be? Keep
writing. Don't worry about the quality of your writing when you start. Just get it on paper. You can edit paper. You can't edit air. So just write and then worry about editing after you've written.
I really like that. You can't edit paper, or you can edit paper. You can't edit air. I love that. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate you being on here, Rebecca. It was just a delight to listen to you. And I really hope that this inspires people to pick up your book, because it is definitely a worthwhile read. I was telling my husband about it on my drive here and saying who I was going to interview. And he's like, oh yeah. He goes, you'll have to get me that book. And I'm like, oh, we might have to get a copy that we can set on the coffee table. A good coffee table book. But anyway, thank you so much again. Really appreciate you being on here.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.